And the vast majority, and many systems have too many features. Okay, now you have this thing called cost, schedule, and scope. You've heard of those three, yes? Cost, schedule, scope. Let's say you can't do one of them. Which one should go? Scope should go. Is that what happens in your world? If you can't meet the deadline, you throw out scope. Yes? No? How often? When you're in a fixed price contract, it's really tough. When you're in a collaborative relationship and everybody understands the rules, what you want to do is design the system to meet the constraints, the business constraints, not the other way around. That's the first thing, is understand the business constraints and design to meet them, not have a design and then figure out how to make it within a window. So if you have a round hole, you don't want a square peg. And secondly, decouple workflows. See how you can decouple workflows with a decoupled architecture, with anything you can do to decouple workflows, so that you don't have massive number of teams that have to coordinate. So if you have a system design, you can break your system up into logical subcomponents. And I don't mean logical feature subcomponents so much as logical system subcomponents. And systems are usually not software only. And even if there are systems that don't exist for the purpose of having software. Systems exist for some other purpose. Software is embedded in a business process, it's embedded in a piece of hardware. It usually, and almost always, has a higher purpose for being than being software. And what you need to do is decouple the workflows in your higher level system. And workflows are easier to control and more predictable than schedules. So if your customer is looking for predictability, guess what? Workflows really give them more predictability than having a task and a deadline and a task and a deadline, which is what I mean by schedules in this case. So workflows, when they work, are much better predictors of things that are much easier to control and much better predictors. So let me go into that a little bit more. This will be the iterative workflow, a Scrum-like process. Another workflow would be a Kanban system. I don't have much time for that tonight, so I didn't put it in unless I get asked. But those are two separate mechanisms for managing flow of work through the system. And in an iterative system, you start out with high-level business goals or a product concept, or you know what it is that you're trying to do. You understand the architecture to do it, and then shortly before you're going to actually do it, you get some people together. You get a tester, somebody who really understands the system itself. You get a developer, and you go into what I call discovery phase. And what they're doing is breaking it out into detail, as close as possible to when it's going to be implemented as is practical. And they will create stories. Now, the stories, preferably you don't want too many of them, but some features, you might have a whole puzzle's worth of stories there. And tests. So these stories and tests are truly ready to go. They're ready to go. Got it? So this is the point in time when you have a planning meeting to say, what can we do? Our velocity is 50 story points. Well, we'll do maybe 51 max, or 49, or 50, something like that. The team commits to how many story points it can do, and then it does a iteration, and every day everybody gets together and says, what do we need to do to meet that commitment? So you do commit, and at the end, deliver. So commit and deliver, commit and deliver. Basically the same number of story points over time, and that's your capacity. So velocity is a measure of capacity. And if you have a Kanban system, you can measure throughput. You need to understand capacity. So every 2 weeks, say, or whatever your iteration cycle is, you have truly done stuff. And you get some feedback by showing that to people, and if possible, you deploy it as soon as you can and get even more feedback. So that's the basic iterative workflow. When this is working, you know what you can do. 50 story points per team for this team, and maybe 45 for that team, and 70 for another team. The points are not necessarily an indicator of much of anything except what that team is used to doing in their domain. But you can see how much stuff flows through that team. 2 or 3 iterations into things, you have a pretty good idea of the flow. And that, if you can keep that flow going, that's predictable over time. And that is easier to manage than deadlines and schedules. Questions? Comments? Tell me I'm nuts. One of the things to notice here is that one of the issues you want to think about to make sure that you have a really good handle on what you're doing. I know I had this bright green thing. I wonder what I did. Ah, there it is. Ah, there we go. So when you make this commitment here, when you break your things out into detail, this happens before the commitment meeting, so that when you're doing commitment, you have figured out a whole bunch about what it is you're trying to do. And these are, including developer and other team members, people who are thinking really hard, sometimes using classic software analysis techniques like, use cases or decision matrices or all that sort of thing, to figure out exactly what this high-level goal is going to mean in detail. So I believe this is a team effort, and it precedes the commitment meeting. It doesn't follow the commitment meeting. And there's more people here than just developers. There's testers, there's systems people, there's people who are subject matter experts, people who understand the market. Those sorts of folks are involved here. And the whole team gets it done every 2 weeks. Okay?
I have a question.
Yes?
Can you sum up what are the benefits of applying workflow?
Okay. If you remember the picture of the arrows, where I had output capacity, let me draw it here. Here is your output capacity, and here is your input flow. And you've got way more stuff going in and out. And so the objective that you're trying to do is to limit what you do to your output capacity. Any kind of workflow management system, one of its most important features is to let you know what this capacity is and make it reliable. You know your velocity and it's reliable. It's commit and deliver 50 points every 2 weeks or whatever it is. So it might be a rough estimate, but over time it's a good enough estimate to give you a pretty good idea of your output capacity. So when you're managing flow, you're managing at this point the output capacity. Then you are taking the input stuff and limiting it to your output capacity. So there's a couple things that happen. You get a reliable amount of stuff going through. You don't get so much stuff pushed down onto the system that you get turbulence, thrashing. When I push too much stuff onto my laptop here, it just crawls. It just goes really slow. You push too many cars onto your highways, they just crawl. Similarly, you push too much work into your development organization, just crawls. So if you are managing from capacity, from knowing how much stuff goes out, then you're limiting your input flow to your output flow. You get a steady, even flow over time that is reliable and predictable. Okay? Yeah?
But the velocity you may know after 3 iterations, let's say. So when you tell customer what is your capacity, if you can know it after 3 iterations,
you need a couple of things to know your capacity, your velocity. One is the team can't be changing all the time, and they have to be in the same domain working together over time. Then you get a pretty good predictable velocity. First few iterations, you don't. One of the things that in order to be able to do accurate predictions that you need is you need knowledge of history. And if you have no history, it's a guess. And I don't think anything makes a guess more than a guess, no matter how much you wish that it would. Nor do I think putting all of little numbers on all these detailed tasks and then summing them up to the total is more than a guess. And in fact, because of variation, the one thing you know is a schedule that has lots of little things, we can't get it executed in the manner that it was planned because variation will always kill it.